The famous grass courts of the All England Club have witnessed some of the greatest moments in tennis history. Centre Court has crowned champions, broken hearts, and introduced future legends to the world. On this day, however, the spotlight was fixed on a matchup that many believed would be one-sided. Across the net stood the reigning Wimbledon champion, a six-time Grand Slam winner who had turned Centre Court into her personal fortress. Few expected anyone to challenge her dominance. Fewer still believed that the biggest threat would come from a 21-year-old player representing the Philippines. Alexandra Eala arrived in London carrying more than a tennis bag. She carried the hopes of an entire nation. As the number 29 seed, she had already made history by becoming the first Filipina in the Open era to earn a singles seed at a Grand Slam tournament. That achievement alone placed her name in the record books, but Eala had made it clear that simply making history was not her goal. She came to compete with the best players in the world. The defending champion entered the match with every advantage imaginable. She knew the surface, she understood the pressure of Centre Court, and she owned one of the strongest resumes in modern tennis. Television analysts predicted another comfortable victory. Betting markets heavily favored the champion. Headlines focused on her quest to defend the Wimbledon title and continue building one of the sport's greatest careers. Alexandra Eala was treated as an interesting story, not a serious threat. That assumption ignored one important detail. Eala had already proven she could defeat elite opponents when the pressure was highest. Earlier in her career, she shocked the tennis world with a victory over the same opponent in Miami, announcing herself as one of the brightest young talents in the sport. Since then, her confidence had only grown. She had developed a more complete game, improved her physical strength, and gained valuable experience against top-ranked players. Getting to the third round of Wimbledon had not been easy. In her opening match, Eala defeated Renata Zarazua in convincing fashion, winning 6-1, 6-2. That victory became another historic milestone, making her the first Filipino player in the Open era to win a Wimbledon singles match. The result was celebrated across the Philippines and by Filipino communities around the world. Social media exploded with messages of support as fans proudly watched one of their own succeed on tennis' biggest stage. The atmosphere surrounding her matches had become one of the tournament's biggest surprises. Court 12, usually one of Wimbledon's quieter venues, transformed into one of the loudest locations on the grounds. Thousands of Filipino fans filled every available seat, while many more waited outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of a rising star. Flags waved throughout the crowd. Chants echoed between points. Longtime Wimbledon visitors remarked that they had rarely seen such passionate support for a player outside the traditional tennis powers. Tournament officials quickly realized they were witnessing something unusual. Eala's matches were attracting crowds normally reserved for Grand Slam champions. Television cameras repeatedly showed fans wearing Philippine colors, creating an atmosphere that resembled an international team competition more than an individual tennis match. The support demonstrated how one player had inspired an entire nation to follow a sport that had rarely received this level of attention in the Philippines. The second round tested Eala's resilience even more. Standing across the net was Maya Joint, a familiar opponent who had defeated her in the Eastbourne final the previous season. Joint entered the match with confidence after eliminating Serena Williams in the opening round, making her one of the tournament's early stories. When Eala dropped the first set 6-3, many believed her remarkable Wimbledon run was coming to an end. Instead, the young Filipina produced the kind of comeback that defines future champions. She adjusted her tactics, became more aggressive on return games, and steadily took control of the rallies. She captured the second, set 6-2, before completely dominating the third, winning it 6-0. After trailing early, she closed the match by winning 9 consecutive games, displaying not only physical endurance, but also remarkable mental toughness. That comeback changed everything. Instead of quietly exiting the tournament, Eala earned a place on Centre Court against the defending Wimbledon champion. The matchup instantly became one of the most anticipated contests of the tournament. Fans who had followed her remarkable rise believed another upset was possible. Others remained skeptical, convinced that experience would ultimately prevail. Before stepping onto Centre Court, Eala spoke about what the opportunity meant. She explained that representing the Philippines on tennis' biggest stage carried tremendous responsibility, but also incredible pride. Every match, she said, was about showing young athletes back home that reaching the highest levels of international sport was possible through dedication, discipline, and belief. By the time both players walked onto the court, the stage could not have been any bigger. 15,000 spectators filled center court. Members of the royal box watched closely. Millions more followed the match around the world. One side featured an established champion defending her title. The other featured a rising star attempting to create one of the biggest moments of her young career. What followed would become one of the defining stories of the tournament. It was no longer simply about rankings or championships. It became a clash between experience and fearless ambition, between a proven champion and a young player determined to prove that her remarkable rise was only beginning. Wimbledon had expected another routine day for its defending champion. Instead, the stage was set for a performance that would leave fans, analysts, and fellow players questioning whether the next great star of women's tennis had officially. Center court at Wimbledon is where champions protect their legacy. It is the court where pressure is greatest, where history is written, and where every mistake is remembered forever. On this day, all eyes were fixed on defending champion Iga Swiatek. She had already collected 6 Grand Slam titles, dominated the biggest tournaments in the sport, and had become one of the most consistent players of her generation. She had not lost on center court since lifting the Wimbledon trophy the previous year. Most analysts expected another comfortable victory. The conversation before the match centered on how far Swiatek could go in defending her title. Almost nobody believed her opponent could seriously threaten her. Standing across the net was 21-year-old Eala, the first Filipina in history to earn a seeded position in a Grand Slam singles draw. Her journey alone had already become one of the biggest stories in international tennis. She grew up in Quezon City dreaming of competing on the sport's biggest stages. Years of sacrifice, overseas training, and countless hours of practice had finally brought her to the most famous court in tennis. Now, she faced the defending Wimbledon champion, with millions watching around the world. Many casual fans knew Eala because of her exciting run during the season, but longtime tennis followers understood that this opportunity had been earned through steady improvement. Her victories over elite opponents during previous tournaments proved she was no longer simply a promising young player. She had developed into someone capable of challenging the very best. Even so, facing the defending champion on center court is a completely different test. Experience, crowd pressure, and championship expectations often overwhelm young players. That is why so many experts believe this match would be another routine win for Swiatek. Eala arrived in London carrying much more than her own ambitions. She represented a nation that had never experienced a player reaching this level in women's tennis. Every match felt larger than sport. Filipino communities from around the world traveled to Wimbledon wearing national colors, waving flags, and filling the stands wherever she played. Their support transformed ordinary matches into unforgettable events. Tournament officials noticed that whenever Eala appeared on the schedule, attendance surged and crowds gathered hours before the first serve. Her popularity had become one of the biggest surprises of the season. Her tournament began with another historic milestone. In the opening round, Eala defeated her opponent in convincing fashion, becoming the first Filipino player of the Open era to win a Wimbledon singles match. That victory was celebrated far beyond London. Television audiences back home grew dramatically, social media exploded with support, and many young athletes suddenly saw tennis as a sport worth pursuing. The result represented more than advancing in the draw. It showed that players from countries with limited tennis tradition could compete successfully at the highest level. The second round tested her resilience even more. Waiting across the net was Maya Joint, a familiar opponent who had defeated Eala earlier in the grass court season. Joint entered the match with confidence after scoring one of the tournament's biggest early victories. When Eala dropped the opening set 6-3, many believed her remarkable Wimbledon run was about to end. The momentum belonged entirely to her opponent, and the pressure continued to build with every game. Instead of losing confidence, Eala completely changed the direction of the match. She adjusted her positioning, became more aggressive on return games, and started dictating rallies with greater confidence. The second set belonged to her 6-2. Then came one of the most dominant stretches of tennis she had produced all year. She swept through the deciding set 6-0, winning the final 9 games of the match. It was not simply a comeback. It was a complete turnaround built on discipline, patience, and fearless shot-making. That victory earned her a place in the third round against defending champion Iga Swiatek. Suddenly, what had started as a historic Wimbledon appearance became one of the biggest matches of the tournament. The matchup brought together an established Grand Slam champion and one of the fastest-rising young stars in the game. Tennis fans around the world immediately circled the contest as one of the must-watch matches of the championships. Before stepping onto center court, Eala spoke about what the moment meant to her. She explained that representing the Philippines on tennis's biggest stage carried enormous responsibility and pride. She understood that millions of people back home would be watching. She also knew countless young players would see her performance as proof that reaching the highest level of international tennis was possible regardless of where they were born. By reaching the third round, Eala had already secured the largest prize money of her professional career and guaranteed valuable ranking points that would strengthen her position on the WTA Tour. For many players, that achievement alone would have been enough. For Eala, however, the goal had already shifted. She wanted the challenge that every competitor dreams about. She wanted to test herself against the reigning Wimbledon champion on the sport's most famous court. As match day arrived, the atmosphere around center court felt different. Fans filled the stands early. Television cameras focused on every warm-up shot. Commentators discussed whether experience would prevail or whether another stunning upset could shake the tournament. On one side stood a proven champion defending her crown. On the other stood a fearless young player carrying the hopes of an entire nation. Everything was set for a match that had the potential to become one of the defining moments of Wimbledon.